10,000 years have passed since the Emperor's fall, and still, the Space Marines march. They fight wars across the stars that will never end. They purge worlds in the name of purity, even as the Imperium itself rots from within. They are relics of an age that believed in miracles, now forced to serve a god who has been silent for millennia. Their armor shines, but the souls beneath it are dimming. Warriors turned into myths, myths turned into tools of fear. Every generation of humanity that rises under the Imperium grows up in their shadow. Children are told stories of the noble Astartes, the angels of the Emperor, protectors of mankind. But those stories are lies meant to comfort the weak. Because the truth is far darker, the Space Marines were never meant to protect mankind's spirit, only its survival. And what is survival without meaning? What is life when it exists only to serve death? The galaxy itself remembers. Every planet scarred by orbital bombardment, every civilization wiped away in the name of the Emperor, every cry for mercy that fell on deaf ears, these are their monuments. The Imperium calls them saints, but the stars know them as executioners. And even now, across a million worlds, they still march, still obey, still kill in the name of a dream long dead. Their legacy is not salvation. It is silence. Yet somewhere, buried deep in their fractured memories, lies something almost human. A flicker of doubt, a whisper of regret. Some Space Marines begin to question, not out of rebellion, but out of weariness, a quiet understanding that the war will never end, because it was never meant to. The Emperor's greatest truth was not his power, but his fear. He feared what humanity could become without control. And that fear lives on through his sons, through every blade they raise, every world they burn, every brother they bury. But there is something even more terrifying, the realization that the galaxy cannot exist without them anymore. The Imperium is too vast, too broken, too consumed by its own decay. Without the Astartes, it would collapse entirely. Humanity depends on its monsters now. The very thing that damned them is what keeps them alive. It is a cycle without beginning or end, a legacy that feeds upon itself. That is why the Space Marines can never be unmade. They are both the disease and the cure. The embodiment of the Emperor's failure and humanity's dependence on that failure. They were never meant to be immortal, yet they have outlived their purpose, becoming symbols of everything they were created to destroy. They are the eternal guardians of a tomb, the tomb of human potential, sealed by their own perfection. And so, their legacy endures, not in glory, but in despair. A reminder that sometimes, the greatest evil is born not from hatred, but from love. The Emperor loved humanity so much that he could not let it be free. And the Space Marines, in their blind devotion, will spend eternity paying for that love. When the Emperor forged his legions, he believed he was creating perfection. But perfection was never the point. The point was control. He wanted to shape mankind into something that could never disobey him, never question him, never stray from his vision. But in doing so, he created something that no longer belonged to humanity at all. The Space Marines are proof that the line between savior and tyrant is thinner than a whisper, and once it's crossed, there's no going back. Look at them now, ageless, merciless, unchanging. Their devotion is pure, but purity is not a virtue, it's a cage. They no longer fight for the Emperor's dream, because that dream died with him. They fight because they were made to. They fight because they cannot stop. Every battle they win is another step deeper into the grave of their own purpose. And still, the galaxy calls them holy. Still, the Imperium prays to them as if they are gods. But what kind of God never sleeps, never laughs, never lives? What kind of God forgets what it means to be human? That is the true horror of the Space Marines, not their power, not their immortality, but their emptiness. They are the void the Emperor left behind, filled with duty and rage. They are living proof that in trying to perfect mankind, he destroyed its heart. And now, the Imperium worships the shell that remains, a galaxy-wide religion built on obedience, built on fear, built on the bones of what could have been. And yet, somewhere in that silence, there's still a question. A question that no space marine can answer, and no human dares to ask. What if the Emperor was wrong? What if humanity was never meant to be perfected, only to endure? Because endurance is not the absence of weakness. It's the acceptance of it. It's the strength to fail, to learn, to rise again. The Space Marines cannot fail. And that is why they can never grow. They can only continue, forever trapped between godhood and nothingness. This is the final truth. The Space Marines should have never been made, not because they are evil, but because they are proof that mankind lost faith in itself. They were born from fear, the fear that humanity was too fragile, too chaotic, too flawed to survive on its own. But it is those very flaws, doubt, pain, compassion, that give humanity its strength. Without them, we are nothing but machines wearing flesh. The Emperor tried to erase chaos, but chaos is life. And in rejecting it, he created death in its purest form, a death that walks, breathes, and kills in his name. The Space Marines are the death made manifest, and as long as they exist, the dream of freedom will never truly live. So maybe the real question isn't why the Space Marines should have never been made. Maybe it's whether humanity can ever unmake them, or if we're already too far gone. Because once you trade your soul for survival, there's no victory left to win. 10,000 years after the Emperor was entombed upon his golden throne, the galaxy has forgotten what it was even fighting for. The Imperium worships the husk of its creator, feeding billions of lives into the flames of his machinery just to keep the illusion of stability alive. Worlds burn, faith spreads like disease, progress has become heresy. And yet, through all of it, the Space Marines endure, silent, eternal, unchanging. They are the echoes of their maker's will, repeating the same command forever: protect humanity. But what humanity remains to protect? Each chapter follows its own creed now, its own twisted interpretation of the Emperor's dream. Some have become zealots, preaching the purity of flesh and soul. Others have turned inward, fighting endless wars against enemies that barely exist. A few have begun to question. But even their doubts are drowned beneath the roar of bolter fire and the endless chant of war. Because in the Imperium, thinking is treason, and treason is death. And death, for a Space Marine, is the only mercy they can no longer remember how to ask for. The Mechanicus, the priests of the machine god, revere them as divine constructs, walking relics of a bygone age. They worship the armor, the weapon, the process that made them. To them, the Astartes are proof that divinity can be engineered. But they never ask whether the machine should have been built in the first place. They maintain the shell, polish the relic, and whisper prayers to circuits that no longer understand what purpose they serve. The Space Marines are not gods, they are ghosts of machinery, echoes of design, trapped in the endless hum of a universe that mistakes motion for meaning. And through it all, the Emperor's lie lives on, the lie that control can bring order, that obedience can bring peace. Every world conquered in his name is another gear in the endless mechanism of the Imperium. Every victory is another layer of rust on the dream of human freedom. And the Space Marines, those perfect creations, are the pistons that keep it moving. They fight without question, they kill without hesitation, they exist without end. Because the machine does not stop, it never stops, and neither can they. But perhaps the most tragic truth is this: they don't want to stop. They have forgotten how to be anything else. The few who remember what came before, the faces of brothers lost, the laughter of a time when they were still men, are haunted by it. Immortality has stripped them of everything but memory, and memory has become their curse. They are the ghosts of a god's ambition, condemned to wander forever between what they were made to be and what they can never become again. So the galaxy keeps turning. The Imperium decays but refuses to die. The chaos gods laugh from the void, feeding on the fear that sustains it all. And the Space Marines, the Emperor's angels, march on, immortal, unfeeling, unchanging. They were made to protect humanity, but now they protect only the shadow of his empire. The machine endures because they endure. And somewhere, buried deep beneath the static of eternity, one question remains unanswered. Who will protect humanity from its protectors? That is the echo of the machine god. The sound of perfection devouring itself. The legacy of a species that tried to master creation and instead became enslaved by it. The Space Marines should have never been made, because in making them, the Emperor ensured that humanity would never truly live again. One day, perhaps 1,000 years from now, perhaps 1,000,000, even the Imperium will finally fall. The great hive cities will crumble into dust. The cathedrals built in the Emperor's name will crack and sink beneath oceans of forgotten worlds. The golden throne will dim, its light fading like a candle burned to nothing. And when that happens, when the machinery stops, the last of the Space Marines will still stand. Alone, watching the stars go dark. He will not remember why he was created. He will not remember the Emperor, or Terra, or the Great Crusade. He will only know that he was made to fight, to protect, to kill, and as the galaxies fall silent around him, he will finally understand, there is nothing left to protect. Humanity's final guardian, standing in a universe that no longer remembers the word human. That is the destiny written into their blood, to outlive the species they were meant to save. To carry the burden of perfection until perfection has no meaning. They will not die. They will simply fade, like echoes in the void, like the hum of a machine that has forgotten its purpose. And when the last Astartes falls, the universe will finally be free of the Emperor's dream. But that freedom will come too late. The price will have been everything. And yet, perhaps, that is how it was always meant to be. The Emperor thought he could command the stars, that he could bend the laws of existence through will alone. But no creation escapes its creator's flaw. The Space Marines were never a testament to his genius, they were monuments to his fear. His need to control what could never be controlled. His refusal to trust in the very thing he sought to protect, the human spirit. The story of the Space Marines is not just a warning for the 41st millennium, it is a mirror held up to us all. Because the moment we decide that imperfection is weakness, we begin the same descent. The moment we choose obedience over understanding, power over empathy, control over freedom, we build our own legions. Maybe not of flesh and armor, but of ideology and pride. And those legions will destroy us just the same. The quiet end is not a scream. It's a whisper, the whisper of realization. That salvation was never about gods or empires or eternal war. It was about the fragile, fleeting beauty of being human, flawed, temporary, alive. Something the Emperor forgot. Something the Space Marines were never allowed to be. And something, perhaps, that we must never forget. Because when the noise fades, when the wars are done and the stars grow cold, what will remain is not the glory of conquest, but the memory of what was lost trying to reach it. And maybe, just maybe, that final silence will be the first sound of peace. Somewhere, on a forgotten world orbiting a dying sun, a single suit of power armor stands half buried in ash. The body within it long since turned to dust. But the armor still hums faintly, as if remembering. The machine spirit whispers ancient names, Dorn, Guilliman, Sanguinius. Legends spoken like prayers to no one. And then, silence again. That silence is the Imperium's legacy, a monument to a species that reached too high, grasped at godhood, and lost itself to the stars. But here's the truth that endures. The Emperor's dream was never just about conquest. Beneath the layers of war and worship, beneath the blood and betrayal, there was something fragile, a desire to save mankind from itself. He saw humanity's potential, but he did not trust its heart. So he built the Space Marines to be its shield. What he never realized was that a shield, once raised, can never embrace. It can only divide, and that division cost humanity everything. Yet, even after the fires burned out, even after the last star faded, something remains. Not the Imperium, not the Astartes, but the idea, the memory, that humanity once dared to reach for more. That, perhaps, somewhere deep in that endless void, the human soul still drifts, waiting to be reborn. Waiting to try again. Because that is the paradox of creation. Every ending carries the seed of its beginning. The Emperor tried to craft eternity, but all he made was the cycle, the eternal return of ambition, fear, and hope. And maybe, just maybe, that's not a curse. Maybe that's what it means to be human. To fail endlessly, and still rise. To build gods, destroy them, and then dream again in their ashes. The Space Marines will never return, but their echo will never fade. It will live on in the memory of struggle, in the yearning to become something greater, in the endless question that drives all existence: what if we could be more? That question is older than the Imperium, older than the stars, older than time itself. It's what defines us. It's what dooms us. And it's what makes us eternal. So, when you think of the Space Marines, do not think of them as monsters or martyrs. Think of them as the reflection of what humanity might become when it loses faith in its own humanity. Remember them not as heroes, but as warnings carved into the fabric of eternity, that the pursuit of perfection without compassion will always lead to ruin. And in that ruin, listen closely, for the faint hum still echoing through the cosmos is not the sound of machines or gods. It's the whisper of humanity's oldest truth, that we were never meant to be perfect, only to be alive. That question doesn't echo. It doesn't need to. Because in the Imperium of man, the silence answers for you. Imagine a civilization so vast that no mind can hold its scale. 1,000,000 worlds, no, more. Planets upon planets, each packed with uncountable billions of souls. Trillions of voices crying out into the void, all speaking the same words, prayers to a God who has been dead for 10,000 years. Every breath taken is an act of faith. Every movement, every heartbeat, a ritual performed to keep the machine of humanity grinding forward for one more day. But ask anyone born into this age, what does it mean to live? And they will not understand the question. Because in the 41st millennium, life is not lived. It is endured. The universe itself has turned against the idea of existence. The stars have grown old and tired, and so has humanity. Once, mankind believed in progress, in reason, in the boundless promise of discovery. Now, it believes only in survival. The Imperium is a mausoleum, a civilization embalmed in faith and bureaucracy, worshipping the decaying memory of what it once was. Its people are not citizens. They are fuel, and their purpose is simple: burn until nothing remains. Each day across the galaxy, millions die, and no one remembers their names. Their ashes are recycled into soil, their blood into lubricant for machines older than memory. On some worlds, they are born beneath steel skies, never once seeing the sun. On others, they live inside hive towers so tall that clouds form halfway up, and sunlight never reaches the depths below. In those endless shadows, humanity toils, generation after generation, never questioning, never dreaming. They say ignorance is a kind of mercy. Because to know the truth of this age, to see the Imperium for what it really is, would drive most men mad. There was a time when mankind looked up at the stars and saw promise. Now, it looks up and sees only the eyes of gods and monsters staring back. Every world is a fortress. Every soul is a soldier, even if they never hold a weapon. For in the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war, and the kind of peace that exists only in the grave. But that phrase, that ancient, cursed phrase, people repeat it without understanding. They say, there is only war. Yet war, at least, implies choice. Struggle. Resistance. The truth is worse. There is only service. Service to duty. Service to faith. Service to systems so immense that a human life is worth less than the machine grease that oils the gears. The Imperium of man calls this obedience. It calls it righteousness. It calls it survival. But strip away the banners, the sermons, the endless chants of devotion, and what remains is a simple, horrifying truth: the average life in the 41st millennium is a slow death that never ends. The people don't rebel because they cannot imagine a world without chains. They don't speak because words themselves have been weaponized. They don't dream because dreaming has been outlawed by reality. And yet, they go on. Day after day, century after century. They are born in darkness, live in servitude, and die nameless beneath the banners of gods who will never hear them. Sometimes, deep within the hum of a hive city or the cold vacuum of a mining station, someone still asks the forbidden question, whispered in the quiet moments between exhaustion and sleep. Is this all there is? And always, the universe answers. With silence, with machinery, with the hollow rhythm of 10 trillion lives repeating the same motions forever. To live in the 41st millennium is to be forgotten before you even die. To be human is to be expendable. To have faith is to surrender the last piece of yourself that still belongs to you. And yet, somehow, they endure, not because they hope for something better, but because there is no alternative. The emperor watches over them, they say. But the emperor is silent. The priests say he speaks through the pain, through the war, through the sacrifice. But if he truly does, then the only message he has left for his people is suffering itself. This is the beginning of the truth. This is the first breath of understanding. This is what it means to live in the Imperium of man. In the 41st millennium, for most of humanity, the sky is nothing but a story. A myth passed down by those who once lived on worlds that still had one. Because here, among the hive worlds of the Imperium, there is no open sky, only the endless metal spires stretching so high they pierce the clouds themselves. Below those spires, there is only darkness, smoke, and the eternal hum of machines that never stop. Stay till the end of this video, and you'll hear something that no citizen of the Imperium ever dares to say aloud. Something forbidden, something that could get you executed for even thinking it. But first, you must understand what it means to be born here, where life begins not with hope, but with a barcode. Children come screaming into the manufactorums, not hospitals. They are tagged, numbered, and registered before they take their first breath. The walls around them are gray, stained with centuries of industrial soot. There are no windows, no sound of wind, only the hiss of venting steam and the mechanical heartbeat of the hive. The air tastes like iron. The lights never go out. You could live your entire life here and never once see the sun, because in a hive city, the sun belongs to the rich who live in the spires above the clouds. For the rest, it's only a rumor. Every corridor looks the same. Rusted steel, oil stains, flickering lumen strips that never stop buzzing. Generations live stacked on top of one another in endless tiers, the upper levels where the middle citizens breathe filtered air, and the underhive where the forgotten rot. In the manufactorums, workers stand shoulder to shoulder for 14 hours at a time. They craft weapons, armor, food rations, anything the Imperium demands. The machines are older than the people who serve them. Some of them are worshipped like gods. Entire families are assigned to a single machine, maintaining it for centuries, never once seeing the finished product. You don't learn your name in a hive. You learn your duty. You don't have time to question why the smoke never clears, or why the walls vibrate every few seconds from explosions in the distance. You just work, and breathe, and pray the next shift doesn't end with your body fed into the recycler. People disappear here, quietly, efficiently. Sometimes it's because of mechanical accidents. Sometimes because they spoke words that sounded too much like questions. And yet, amid the endless labor, the noise, the choking fog, there are moments. Small, fragile moments where something human still flickers. A worker might pause and glance up through the grates, imagining what it would be like to see a star. A mother hums a lullaby that no one remembers the origin of. A child stares at the steam clouds and imagines they're alive. That's what the Imperium doesn't understand. It can crush bodies. It can silence voices. But the human mind, it still dreams. Even in the dark, even in the filth, faith in the Emperor is mandatory. Devotion is demanded. But faith isn't what keeps these people alive. Habit does. Routine. The unbreakable momentum of repetition. Because if they stopped, even for a moment, they might realize the truth. That they are already dead. In the underhive, things are worse. Entire districts collapse and are left to decay. There, the air is poison, the food is rats, and the laws are whatever the gangs decide. People fight over water. They sell scrap, flesh, and secrets, anything to buy another sunrise they'll never see. Yet even in that hell, you will find laughter. You will find love. You will find people who still sing. Because humans, no matter how broken, cannot stop pretending they are still alive. That's what makes the hive so horrifying. Not the decay, not the servitude, but the fact that life continues anyway. That people find ways to exist, even when existence itself feels like punishment. In the Imperium, hope is heresy. And still, it survives, hidden in whispers, in tiny gestures, in the act of enduring one more day. So when someone in the upper hive looks down upon the endless smog and says, "They are the Emperor's faithful," what they really mean is this: they are the Emperor's fuel. Millions live, work, and die in silence. And when their bodies are gone, their places are filled before the blood even dries. But among them, somewhere, right now, there's a child looking up through the vents, wondering what a real sky looks like. And that forbidden thought, is the last flicker of rebellion left in the species called man. In the Imperium of man, courage isn't a virtue, it's a malfunction. Because to feel fear, to know terror, is the only way a human being remembers they're still alive. The Astra Militarum, the Imperial Guard, they call it the hammer of humanity. Billions of soldiers, drawn from every world, trained to die for a cause they will never understand. To outsiders, it looks like an army. To those inside it, it's something much darker, a vast, unending tide of flesh thrown into the fire, over and over again. For most, joining the guard isn't a choice. It's a sentence. Conscription notices appear in hive squares, noble estates, and frontier villages alike. Entire generations are taken, the strong, the weak, the terrified, herded into transports like cattle. They are promised honor, food, a purpose beyond survival. But what awaits them is only one truth: the Emperor requires sacrifice, and you are it. They call the day of departure, the Ascension. Families line the corridors to watch their loved ones march away. Some cheer, some weep, but all know the same thing: they will never see them again. The ships that carry them through the void are not meant for comfort. Cold, rusting metal, lights that flicker with every passing hour. The smell of recycled air and oil. The hum of the warp engines, like a heartbeat that never stops. For months, they wait in silence. No one tells them where they're going. Some pray. Some whisper songs from home. Others just stare at the walls until the walls start whispering back. And then, one day, the silence ends. The alarms sound. The dropships open. And the soldiers step out, not into a new world, but into hell itself. A guardsman's first battle is never glorious. It's confusion, mud, smoke, the air thick with the smell of blood and ozone. Commands shouted over the roar of artillery. The ground trembling as titans walk in the distance. You don't see the enemy, you just see flashes, screams, and the faces of people who were alive seconds ago, now just pieces. The propaganda promised courage, but courage doesn't exist here. Only instinct. You fire because your hands were trained to. You advance because the commissar is watching. You survive because you didn't die fast enough. No one tells you how quiet it gets afterward. When the gunfire fades, and you look around, and realize that almost everyone who came with you is gone. You sit in the mud, staring at the horizon, and it hits you: this isn't victory. This is maintenance. The universe eats life, and the guard is its steady meal. And, yet, they keep fighting. Because in the Imperium, death is duty. And to refuse death, is treason. The officers give speeches about honor. They quote scripture, raise banners, and promise salvation. But the soldiers don't listen. They're too tired, too numb. They march not for glory, but because movement is easier than thought. Still, among the endless waves of war, there are moments, brief, human moments, that pierce the fog. A guardsman sharing a stolen ration with a comrade. A laugh echoing between explosions. A memory of sunlight on a world they can barely recall. Those moments are dangerous, because they remind you that you are human. And in the eyes of the Imperium, humanity is weakness. The priests say the Emperor protects. But the soldiers know the truth. The Emperor is far away, silent, unmoving. Out here, in the mud and the blood, no one protects you but the man standing beside you. And when he falls, you step over him, reload, and keep walking. There are no heroes in the guard. Only survivors. And even they are temporary. Sometimes, when the battle ends and the survivors are loaded back onto the ships, a strange thing happens. They pray for deployment again. Not because they crave war, but because peace is worse. In peace, they have time to think. To remember. To feel the weight of what they've done. That's the tragedy of the Astra Militarum. They are the most human of all humanity's servants, and for that, they suffer the most. Every victory they win is forgotten. Every death they die is unrecorded. And yet, without them, the Imperium would collapse overnight. They are the gears in the machine that holds the galaxy together, bleeding, rusting, and endlessly replaced. So, what is courage? It's not the absence of fear. It's marching forward when you know your name will never be remembered. And that is the only kind of courage the 41st millennium allows. In the Imperium of man, faith is not something you discover. It is something you are born into, and something you are expected to die for. Every world, every city, every household within the Imperium is bathed in the light of the ecclesiarchy, the state religion that worships the Emperor as a god. From the moment you can walk, you are taught to kneel. From the moment you can speak, you are taught the words that will one day condemn you if spoken the wrong way. The priests tell the people that faith is their armor. That devotion protects the soul from corruption. That doubt is the seed of heresy, and heresy is death. But what they don't say, what no one dares to say, is that faith is also the leash that keeps the Imperium from tearing itself apart. The churches of the God Emperor are everywhere. Cathedrals taller than hive towers, their walls dripping with candle wax and the stench of incense. Inside, rows upon rows of the faithful kneel before golden statues of a man who has been dead for 10,000 years. They whisper prayers not because they believe they will be heard, but because silence is dangerous. In the Imperium, not praying is a crime. A citizen's daily routine revolves around worship, morning chants before labor, blessings before meals, confessions before sleep. Every action must be sanctified, every thought aligned with Scripture. Children learn catechisms before they learn to read. Workers recite psalms while assembling weapons they will never wield. Soldiers pray before battles they will never survive. And all of it, is done for a God who has not spoken in 10 millennia. But what happens when someone begins to question that silence? There was once a woman named Sarah, born on a shrine world where the entire population served the ecclesiarchy. She was a devoted believer. She scrubbed the steps of the cathedral every morning, cleaned the relics every evening, and whispered her prayers into the dark when the power failed. For years, she obeyed. For years, she believed. Until one day, her son fell ill. She prayed for healing. She gave offerings. She fasted, bled, and begged the emperor for mercy. The priests told her to have faith, that suffering was proof of devotion. But as her son's breathing slowed and his body went cold, faith began to taste like ash. Sarah didn't curse the emperor. She didn't renounce her belief. She simply stopped praying aloud. And that was enough. The next day, the confessor came. He asked her to reaffirm her loyalty. She hesitated, just long enough for them to notice. They called it blasphemy. They dragged her through the streets, made an example of her, and burned her at the base of the cathedral whose steps she had once polished. The flames rose. The priests chanted. The people bowed their heads and whispered prayers for forgiveness, not for her, but for themselves. Because deep down, every one of them knew, it could have been them. That's how faith works in the Imperium. It's not belief. It's survival. You don't pray because you feel the Emperor's presence. You pray because not praying means death. And over centuries, that kind of obedience rots the soul. People forget why they believe. They only remember that they must. But still, the sermons never stop. The preachers speak of glory and divine destiny. They tell the masses that their suffering is holy, their hunger is sacred, their deaths are proof of the Emperor's eternal love. And the people listen, because they have no other choice. The ecclesiarchy does not fear heresy because it is rare. It fears heresy because it is inevitable. Because somewhere, in every congregation, there is always one mind that whispers, "What if he doesn't hear us?" And for that whisper, entire cities have burned. The ecclesiarchy calls it purification. But the truth is simpler. It is maintenance. A system purging the parts that still think. And yet, beneath all the obedience, all the ritual and fear, something still flickers. Real faith, not the kind printed in holy books, but the desperate kind that exists when everything else has failed. Somewhere, in a crumbling shrine or a forgotten prison cell, someone still prays, not for forgiveness, not for salvation, but simply for meaning. For proof that their suffering matters. And maybe, just maybe, that kind of faith is the most dangerous of all. Because it asks for an answer. In the Imperium of man, the line between man and machine was crossed long ago. No one remembers when, no one remembers why. But if you listen closely to the rhythm of its cities, the endless hum of generators, the clatter of pistons, the whispers of static prayers, you realize something terrible: the machine isn't serving humanity anymore. Humanity is serving the machine. The Adeptus Mechanicus, the tech priests of Mars, or the keepers of all knowledge, all technology, all sacred engines that keep the Imperium alive. But they are not human as you or I understand it. They speak in binary chants, their voices layered with the hiss of static and steel. Their bodies are more metal than flesh, their veins filled not with blood, but with oil and data. They believe the flesh is weak. They believe the machine is divine. And they worship not the Emperor, but something older, the Omniscia, the machine god, the spirit of technology itself. For them, emotion is error. Curiosity is risk. To think differently is to invite chaos. Every act of maintenance is a prayer. Every screw turned, every lever pulled, must be done in ritual. Because in the Imperium, even knowledge has become religion. But to truly understand what that means, you have to see what happens to the average man who serves them. He begins as a worker, like any other, a cog in the endless production lines of Mars or a forge world. His days are long, his tasks mechanical. He is told that the Omniscia watches over him. That every mistake is not a failure of skill, but a sin against the machine god. At first, he feels pride in his duty. Then, fear. And finally, numbness. Because sooner or later, the flesh begins to fail. And when it does, the priests come. They replace what is broken: an arm with steel, an eye with a lens, a voice with a vox emitter. They tell him it is a blessing, that each new part brings him closer to divinity. But with every piece replaced, something else fades away: a memory, a feeling, a name. He doesn't notice when he stops dreaming. He doesn't realize when the warmth leaves his hands. He doesn't remember what his own face looked like before the mask. He simply continues, performing his tasks, obeying the rituals,